Hey everyone, welcome to Up to the Second College Football. I am David Nuño. This is episode 4. We do it for the Saturdays, we do it for the culture, and we got a great show for you. We're going to look at all the storylines in college football with our big guest, Pete Fiutak of College Football News. Then our big game showdown is a big one. A&M versus Arkansas, number 6 versus number 17 there in Jerry's World. Billy Liucci of TexAgs.com and Tera Talmadge joining us as well to break down all things there from Pick Trail Nation here on the program. Then we're going to look at some of the other games out there like LSU, Mississippi State. You got Alabama, Southern Miss. Alabama trying to come back from their game there last week against Florida, a tight one that they came away with a victory, and Notre Dame and Wisconsin. Notre Dame has looked very pedestrian so far. We'll see if that continues against a rested Wisconsin team. Smash the like button, subscribe, like it. We'll have a lot more for you. It is Up to the Second College Football. All right, guys, it's now time for our big guest of the week, Pete Fiutak from collegefootballnews.com joining us. And I don't even know where to begin. We got Alabama winning a close game last week against Florida. Clemson struggling to score. Obviously, this Notre Dame team. I have a lot of questions about Oklahoma as well. So we'll start it off, Pete, with Alabama. How vulnerable are they, or is it just tough to play in the swamp?
It's going to be fun to figure this one out. A little of both, because there's a theory out there that win over Miami, that everyone's like, oh, okay, look, Alabama's back. Look at them. They just reloaded. Really wasn't that big a deal. And that Miami just isn't that good. Derek King isn't quite back yet. The defense has a pass rush. That's about it. And it just, okay, they beat Miami, but who doesn't? You know, Michigan State just did it. That's not to say Alabama isn't great. And they certainly looked fantastic for about, 38 minutes or so against the Gators. Vulnerable is kind of the wrong way to put it, but we're about to see. They get the week off this week against Southern Miss, and then I think I got this order right. I think Lane Kiffin comes to town, and then it's the date at College Station, or the other way around. But either way, Ole Miss and Texas A&M. That's for real. Those two games are going to show. Can you handle the Ole Miss offense? Can you handle the Texas A&M style of play? Those are two absolutely losable games for the Tide.
All right, so it's amazing to me how 1 week a team can look pedestrian in one half look pedestrian. Then you got Florida playing inspired ball in the second half. So are they more like the team we saw early on, or what we saw in the second half?
They're good. I mean, the thing about this, it's the exact same analysis as the Ohio State-Oregon game, where there are a few teams in America that can run with Ohio State, that have the athletes. There are very few teams in the country that can run with Alabama. Certainly, they don't have as much talent, but Florida has the guys. They have the 5 stars. They have the guys that could have gone to Alabama. That is a team that was able to kind of hang around and be with them. So that is just one of those games that they're at home, tough game, tough environment. You get out of that if you're Alabama and say, hey, look, that's a team that's got guys too. And we'll see. We'll see when they play Georgia in a couple of weeks just how for real Florida is.
Pete, let's talk this A&M Arkansas game. Before the interview, you and I were talking about it being the only real big game outside of Notre Dame, Wisconsin. So have you figured out the Aggies yet? Are they still being figured out? Because that offensive line seems to be the big question mark right now.
A little bit, and the problem is and we've talked about this before, where A&M's style, it's fine, it works. You control the tempo, and you've got the guys. I mean, the defense has been amazing, and you've got offensive skill players. Can you get that explosion when you need it? Can you take it? It's fine to go slow and go. It's fine to hold the ball on the clock. The problem is that's kind of what Arkansas does. So Arkansas, if you think about it, they've basically tried to figure out how to do Wisconsin, and they tried to do it with Brett Bielema before. Hold the ball, because you can't get the 5-star guys that Alabama and Florida and Texas A&M gets, just like Wisconsin can't get the guys Ohio State gets. So what they tried to do is let's get a bunch of big offensive linemen. Let's get a good defense that fits the system, and let's find our own sort of way of doing this. That's how Wisconsin's been able to do this. And look at what Arkansas does. Blocks, tackles. Sam Pittman's an offensive line guy by nature. This team is a fundamentally sound team that doesn't turn the ball over. It doesn't have the guys Texas A&M has. It can't hang with them punch for punch, but they can control the clock too, and it's going to be more than happy to grind this down like Texas A&M likes to do.
Do you think A&M's offense can figure it out, though? Because that has been a little bit low. It's just been dragging a little bit compared to what they expected to do.
And if it doesn't, the defense seems to bail it out. Look, this is one of those weird – I tend not to get into, the history of rivalries in games. You're talking about 18 to 23-year-old kids who, don't remember or care about 3 years ago or anything. But even when Arkansas was really awful, this game's always been a problem for Texas A&M, or at least it's been a fight. They keep winning it, but at least Arkansas always seems to get up for this, however that means. They always seem to play above their weight a little bit. And now they got a team that's good enough and sound enough to pull this off if this offense can't get it done. So really what's going to have to happen is it's going to be on that defense. Just make Arkansas throw. If you stop the running game, easier said than done. You stop Arkansas. And just, the thing about Texas A&M, though, with that style, it just doesn't panic. They know what it does. They know that they can play the stall ball, keep it at their tempo, and they're eventually going to come out because their defense is going to come through, and they're not going to make the mistakes Arkansas will. But look, if Arkansas starts hitting it with that running game, all of a sudden this game changes.
Pete Fiutak here with us on Up to the Second College Football. Let's talk a little bit about this Wisconsin-Notre Dame game. I don't know what to think here because obviously Notre Dame is struggling to run the ball. Wisconsin's great at stopping the run. Jack Cohn's been a nice player for Notre Dame, but they're not winning a lot of style points. How does this game play out?
Yeah, as we speak, I apologize. I think my thing just dinged. I'm going back and forth with my friend Nick Chepkowski, who runs Fighting Irish Wire, who is all in now thinking Notre Dame's winning this. And I'm trying to tell him, like, look, the way that this happens, this is the type of game that traditionally Wisconsin wins. It's a very easy formula for Wisconsin as a program. When it turns the ball over twice, it has a big problem. 3 times it loses. It cannot overcome takeaways. And that's the one thing Notre Dame can do. They get a pass rush this year, and they can take the ball away if that pass rush works. So Graham Mertz has to be great. However, like you said, Notre Dame's going to gain like 1 rushing yard against this defense. This defense has had 2 weeks off. It's just that good. It's not going to give up anything on the ground. It just depends on whether or not Graham Mertz makes a whole slew of mistakes. And look, Notre Dame's 3-0. It was awful against a bad Florida State. It was awful against the mediocre Toledo team that just lost to a miserable Colorado State. And it was okay against an okay Purdue team. This is it. They win this game. All of a sudden, it's like, hey, look, we've looked awful, but we're 4-0. And, you look game by game by game, the rest of the schedule, there's not a game on there that they can't win. And it just might be one of those Notre Dame teams again if it can pull this off. But I do think this is the type of game that Wisconsin comes in and it's ugly. They hold the ball for 42 minutes and they somehow come away with a win.
Along the same lines, Oklahoma has not been very splashy this year. They do beat Ohio State, but the game a lot closer than I think a lot of people expected. They got West Virginia this upcoming weekend. Just are you buying Oklahoma this year?
To a point. I mean, yes, because they still have the more talent. The thing about this team, though, and we're seeing it along parallel tracks here, Oklahoma and Ohio State. Both of them, I do think, are going to win their respective conferences. But both of those teams, as good as they are better when their quarterback runs. If you think about Ohio State, for example, they threw the ball for a gajillion yards with Dwayne Haskins, and they couldn't get it done. They were better when you had a Justin Fields who was able to run, or a JT Barrett, or a Braxton Miller. Same with Oklahoma. Spencer Rattler is an NFL quarterback. They were better when Jalen Hurts or Kyler Murray was running. Now, Baker Mayfield was a different sort of guy when it came to this offense, but even he was able to move a little bit. But this offense, when it really rocks, it's got the guy under center who can take off and move. And last year, it gets forgotten that offense couldn't run either until Ramondre Stevenson came off of suspension. And all of a sudden, he shows up. Ronnie Perkins shows up on the defensive side. And Oklahoma went from here to boom. They don't have that so far. So unless this running game starts to get going, Oklahoma State's just going to kind of be this
Last thing for you, P, I got to ask you about Penn State. When it's all said and done, are they going to be the best team in the Big Ten?
With Ohio State struggling, it's not crazy. The thing about it is Michigan, everyone keeps forgetting about them. They're playing awesome. And I know the narrative is, well, they haven't played a defense yet. That Washington defense is good. They have run for over 300 yards in 3 straight games, which for Michigan, that's a whole new animal. And the defense, the changes in the coaching staff, that is a different team. The problem is they got to go to Penn State. They got to go to Wisconsin. And I believe I think I have this wrong. Iowa, I think, is the other game that they play on the road. And then, of course, Ohio State they get. So they have 3 or 4 killer road games coming up. And I'm even going to throw Nebraska in there just because that's a curveball. Oh, and Michigan State they got to go to. So all of a sudden, you look at that schedule, it is nasty. And they haven't been away from Ann Arbor yet. So I'm not going to just give it to Penn State yet. I don't quite buy into that offense. Going back to Wisconsin, they lose that game if Wisconsin doesn't wet the bed inside the red zone over and over again. But certainly, there's a shot. Ohio State looks very vulnerable. Penn State, Iowa, Michigan, and even Wisconsin, if it can kind of right the ship a little bit faster. All those teams have a shot at getting at Ohio State this year. But in the end, I still think, as crazy as this year has been so far, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma, give me those four, and they're still probably your college football playoff teams.
Pete Fiutak, we appreciate it, my friend. Talk to you soon.
Anytime. You have a great weekend.
It is now time for our big game showdown. Texas A&M, the number 17 in the country, taking on number 16 Arkansas. It's going to be a slugfest, and we are going to break it all down with Tera Talmadge of Pig Trail Nation and, of course, Billy Liucci, the executive editor and co-owner of TexAgs.com. Thank you guys for joining us. Tera, let's start off with you. So if the Texas game was a huge game there for Arkansas, what does this Texas A&M game mean for Arkansas?
It means a lot. I mean, that Texas game clearly showed that rivalry is still there for a lot of people, but there is no doubt that there is that rivalry with Texas A&M. It's been 9 years that Texas A&M has just owned this battle against Arkansas. And I was at practice the other day, and trust me, it means a lot to this team. They're playing your fight song. They're playing a lot of things to get pumped up and motivated for this matchup.
All right, Billy, so how big of a challenge for A&M is Arkansas, even though they've won 9 straight, but the way A&M has played and the way Arkansas has played?
Well, I think through 3 games, Arkansas has played better football. And if A&M doesn't elevate their game significantly over what they've shown, Arkansas will break that streak, and Sam Pittman will, and they'll claim ownership over the state of Texas for this season. So there's a lot at stake for the Aggies. And it's, look, and Jimbo doesn't coach it that way. And I know, I think I know enough about Sam Pittman to know he does. I mean, they're making this into a big deal, and Jimbo is going to make it into it's the next game. And that, what Pittman's doing has worked. Tera, you and I've talked about what he's done last year. I was so impressed. They went 3-7 last year. I was beyond impressed with the job he did, because they should have beaten Auburn. They should have won a couple other games there. So what he's done has worked wonders in Fayetteville, and what Jimbo's done has worked wonders at A&M. And that's the one thing that I think people are sleeping on with the Aggies, is that this approach of his has won 11 straight games. A lot of those games have been decided late in the fourth quarter, and they've been games where the Aggies have had to just absolutely grind it out. And I don't see how this game will be any different for A&M. Not necessarily the result. They still have to win. And so many of those games hung on a play here or there. But just, they should be going into a type of battle that, even though they haven't looked sharp in these first 3 games, the players in that locker room understand what they're walking into, and they've been there, done that in these 4-quarter, hey, we're going to hit you in the mouth, and we're going to get hit in the mouth some SEC football games. So it should be, it's a weird game because it's kind of a comfort zone, I feel like, for both teams.
Tera, I want to follow up on that thought right there. What has been the recipe for success for Arkansas this year, and really ever since Sam took over?
Well, for starters, I mean, the Arkansas defense has just been pretty dominant throughout the season. And we saw that last year with Barry Odom as well. And this year is no different so far. On the offensive side of the ball, they've been running it extremely well through 3 games this season. And it was great to see KJ Jefferson, Arkansas's quarterback, open it up a little bit through the passing game last week against Georgia Southern. But the ground game is really the strength of that Arkansas offense. They've got multiple different running backs that can make plays for this team. Now, against Texas A&M and going into SEC play, you're going to need some of your wide receivers to step up, because there are some guys that have been a little absent. Of course, Treylon Burks is one of them. He's getting back to his old self, but he was dealing with an injury before the season, and I think he's just taking a little extra time. So maybe this is the game that he actually shows up for Arkansas.
Billy, you alluded to it earlier. The Aggies haven't played their best ball out there. And by the way, you can finish that thought. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think Treylon Burks and Devon A-Chain, Anaya Smith, those are the kind of like wild cards, because like she said, Burks, that you hadn't seen yet quite that Burks from that. And the same thing I would say with Anais, and they're trying to get, I think you'll see them try to get A-Chain. Those 3 playmakers, those are 3 of the top playmakers in this entire conference.
Agreed.
And if any one of those 3 is able to go off, I think that team win. Now, obviously one of each could, but if one of those 3 guys has a monster day, I think that football team is the one that's going to win, because they are playmakers And you're going to need big plays on Saturday to win that game, David.
Billy, can you give us an update injury-wise for Texas A&M? I know Anias got hurt in the last game. He came out. A-Chain got hurt. Looks like he's okay. Just give us an update on how they're doing injury-wise.
Yeah, the big deals would be Anias, who left the game with, I don't know. It looked to me like it was he got his bell rung. So that's always kind of a wait and see thing. But I expect him to be able to go. The other big one was Layden Robinson because of the shakeup that caused for the A&M O-line. I looked up in the second half Saturday, and they had 2 true freshmen of their 5 up front. And then at one point they had 2 tackles that hadn't played a game prior to Saturday in their careers. So getting Layden back will allow them to go back to that original O-line that they started the season with. So those are the 2, and he's expected back as well, David. So that's they'll come into this one a pretty healthy football team.
Tara, on the other hand, though, you have a couple O-linemen there in Arkansas that are banged up. What is the latest on their offensive line?
Yeah, so Ricky Stromberg and Dalton Wagner are 2 of the question marks heading into this game right now against Texas A&M. Sam Pittman really plays that stuff close to the vest. We did not see them at practice yesterday, and so I'm not sure exactly if we're going to see them on Saturday either. But Sam Pittman did say for the most part, if guys can't practice until like Thursday on a game week, the odds of them actually playing on Saturday are very slim. So I would expect to see some changes on the offensive line. Those are 2 huge losses for the Razorbacks if they cannot play.
Hey, Billy, let's talk about Jalen Watermeyer. Last year, he was so huge for them in that game. He hasn't really had a huge impact so far, but they're going to need him against Arkansas.
Yeah, I would say absolutely they will, but I also think Jalen Watermeyer, he's got to make some plays. You're right. And he had the 2 touchdowns last year against Arkansas. And I've talked about it. He's had quiet games in his career. He had 3 or 4 in 10 games last year, but then those other 6 or 7, he was a monster. And he was a monster against Arkansas. And it was a big, he kind of gave them that distance in the third quarter. He was the difference there. He's a red zone animal. He's had 2 different quarterbacks, in 3 games. It's a new starter that's never played and a new starter that's never played. It's been, I think, a rough transition, not just for him. Anias Smith touched the ball 6 times in the last 6 quarters for the Aggies. So they're figuring it out just like Jalen is. But I'll say this, David, I think it's more about the guys on the outside needing to turn in some plays. Hez Jones made some plays against Arkansas last year that you didn't see him. He kind of came out of nowhere. Somebody has to do that on the outside Saturday because Tara mentioned, that defense, Catalan, Morgan, Poole, Henry, they're like a great baseball team. They're really strong up the middle. And maybe it's just a case of they're going to have to put a lot of attention on A&M's number 85. That's going to open up opportunities for those outside guys down the field. They have to take advantage and connect with Calzada.
All right, Tara, tell me your keys to the game for Arkansas for them to come away with a victory there from Jerry's Roll.
Ooh, keys to the game. I'd say up front, that's one thing that is a big question mark for me. I'm wondering how that offensive line is going to look because if Ricky Stromberg and Dalton Wagner don't show up for that game, someone else really needs to. And also penalties. They've had so many penalties through the past couple of games. I think they had like over 100 yards in penalties against Rice, and then they had 8 or 9 penalties this past game against Georgia Southern. So that's one of the keys is actually cleaning it up and just not having things taken back because of a simple holding call or something like that. Because Keytron Jackson was one of the guys at Arkansas. He had his first career touchdown, and then it was just taken away. Against Texas A&M. You cannot afford those types of mistakes. I think also defensively, Arkansas just has to show up like they always do. I'm not really too concerned about the defense making some great plays, maybe get some takeaways. It's been a little bit since we saw Jalen Catalan with the interception or something. And those other guys, like you mentioned, Billy, they're strong up the middle, but some of the other guys like Joe Fouché and Hudson Clark need to make some plays as well for the Razorbacks.
Yeah. Billy, you got any keys for A&M? Same question to you. What do they have to do to get a W there?
I think the start is really important for A&M, offensively and defense. Just the start of that game. Arkansas is going to come in. Tara alluded to it. I mean, they're going to come in on tilt. I mean, they beat the brakes off of Texas. and they're going to come in confident that this streak, really 2 streaks for A&M, are coming to an end in Jerry World on Saturday. So A&M needs to not only weather that early storm, but a good drive or 2 offensively to open the game, I think would take so much pressure mentally off of those blockers and off of that quarterback, that then they can settle in and play their game. So I think that they've got to get big plays from their stars, because at the end of the day, we can talk about Catalan. He's a superstar, right? Burke's superstar in this league. For A&M, A-Chain's of that level. Smith is that level. Weidemeier's that level. We haven't even mentioned Isaiah Spiller yet. He's certainly that level. Their playmakers have to come up big on Saturday. A&M's going to win this game. It's going to be based on that handful of guys touching the football. Even if they have to grind it out and just a big play here, a big play there, and then the rest of it's a struggle. The big players have to make big plays. Their stars do. And then defensively, the key is, to me, it's containing Jefferson, the runner. They've got to put him and that offense behind the chains, because off play action, Tera's seen it all year. They're getting guys wide open because teams are so focused on that run. If you win first down and put Jefferson and those guys behind the chains, I don't think just conventionally lining up on 3rd and 8 is where Arkansas is going to beat you. And that's where A&M, we talk about Catalan, he's a turnover machine. That's where A&M can start getting some takeaways if they put Arkansas on obvious passing downs. Easier said than done.
Billy Liucci, Tera Talmadge, thank you very much for joining us here on the show. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Tera.
All right, now it's time for the big storylines in college football. We're going to begin with LSU and Mississippi State. LSU seemed to get it back on track last week against Central Michigan, and we're joined by Mike Scarborough of TigerBait.com. Mike, how are you, my friend?
Doing good, doing good. It's we're going to see what this LSU team is going to make a new season of it, or if they're going to take a step back and get start SEC playoff like they did last year, which was a humiliating loss in game 1 against Mississippi State at home.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. How much is that game last year, which you started the season with, looming over the way they are going into battle this week?
I don't know that it is. I think it's maybe more of the fans, but I think certainly the coaching staff wants to get that sour taste out of their mouth, and certainly there's some players that were a part of that game as well. But that was absolutely a disaster last year, and I don't know if the 11 a.m. kickoff does LSU favors or Mississippi State favors. It used to be where LSU always played awful on a Saturday morning, but in recent years they played very well, so we'll see.
All right, so after 3 games, obviously the first game, a disaster against UCLA, do you feel like they have figured things out?
I think the defense is getting better each and every week. I think that defensive front is what we thought they could be in the preseason, which is the best that Ed Orgeron's had since he's been at LSU. But certainly in the next few weeks, you're stepping up in competition. Not saying Mississippi State is a great team, but, they're going to throw it 60 times a game. So they're going to want to get pressure on the quarterback. And, of course, B.J. Ojulari was SEC Defensive Lineman of the Week. Andre Anthony had a season-ending injury. But I think and LSU's going to get Jay Ward back at safety, which is very pivotal. LSU's had a run of injuries, but in August and early in the season, the numbers like we've never seen before. So that was a part of some of LSU's issues. So I think defensively they're coming together, but the offensive line is still the big issue.
Mike, I hate to be Captain Obvious here, but just how important is this game? Because to me, 3-1 sounds so much better than 2-2, especially knowing what you have ahead of you.
Yeah. No, I said several weeks ago that it was absolutely pivotal that Ed Orgeron did not drop any of the next 2 games. Took care of Central Michigan at home and has some very big positives coming out of that one. But Mississippi State you have to have, because if you don't win this one, your attempts or the likelihood of meeting expectations are getting into that 8-4, 9-3 realm, which people might say is satisfactory. You can't. You're not going to get there. You got Auburn coming the next week, 8:00 kickoff, and then you start getting into the Floridas and the Alabamas and A&M. Arkansas now doing what they're doing. I'm anxious to see what they look like against Texas A&M this weekend. So there are no easy wins the rest of the way. We're seeing Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss putting up crazy numbers. So if you don't get this one, where are the wins going to come from?
Mike, do you think LSU, I know you mentioned the defense looking much better, but do you think they're prepared for a shootout like this? I mean, because, Mike Liucci will bring it in multiple different ways. LSU is scoring this year, but can they keep up, and can Max Johnson keep up?
I think they can. They just, what we've seen the last 2 weeks is the defense really, for the most part, pitching shutouts. But then they give up a big play or a busted play. Major Burns doesn't, takes the bite and they get a deep ball and it's a touchdown. But for the most part, LSU kept McNeese and Central Michigan virtually in a shutout, didn't give them much of anything. And so if they eliminate that, of course, like I said, getting Jay Ward back at safety is a big deal for LSU. I'm looking forward to seeing him at practice this afternoon.
All right, Mike, last thing for you. What is the key to a victory for LSU Keys, I should say? What do they have to do, and what can they not do against Mississippi State?
The defense keep doing what they're doing, but the offense needs to keep going tempo. Max has been very successful in one tempo. Get rid of the ball quickly and keep getting these freshmen involved. They're not putting the ball on the ground. They're making big plays. Jack Besh, Deion Smith at wide receiver, Corey Kiner had some great runs. A couple of them looked like Clyde Edwards-Helaire on Saturday. And just got to get the running game going, of course. But I think LSU can take care of Mississippi State. But if they don't, it's going to be a crazy post-game show that we're going to have Saturday afternoon.
Mike Scarborough, TigerBait.com. Mike, we appreciate it, my man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, David. Anytime, man.
So how about Alabama? They survived a close one against Florida last week, and they get Southern Miss this upcoming weekend. We're joined now by Tony TSOUKALAS of BamaInsider.com. Tony, thanks so much for joining us, man. What a nail-biter last week.
Yeah, it really was, and it didn't look like it was going to be a nail-biter at first. I mean, Alabama gets a 21-3 lead in the first quarter, and then, it kind of slumps on offense, goes 3 and out 3 straight times in the second quarter, allows Florida to get into the game, allows that crowd in Gainesville and the Swamp to build up some momentum. And then all of a sudden it's a 1-possession game. And, Alabama never trailed in this one, but they did have some tense times and, a few must get short situations that they were able to convert on, a 4th and 1 at the 3 that turned into a touchdown. But yeah, Alabama was sweating, especially late in the game.
Is this more of a reflection of what we're going to see from Alabama this year? That, SEC starts, got some young players out there, defense kind of struggled, or is it more like, dude, Dan Mullen knows how to play against Bama, at least make it tight, and they have talent obviously playing in the Swamp?
Well, I mean, Dan Mullen's like 0-11 against Alabama, so I don't know if that's the right thing, but
everybody is.
I think that Alabama is not as dominant as it was last year, but it could still be the best team. I think it's an expectation thing, right? I think when you look at it, they're not going to be blowing teams out. They don't have the same, offense that they had last year. And so that's going to lead to less blowouts. I do think that there will be some improvements from Alabama's, standpoint. I think the defense is probably not as good as we thought it was, at least so far. And the offense still has some work to go. But there's a lot to be optimistic about from an Alabama perspective. I mean, you look at that Florida game, that was Bryce Young's first road start. So, when you look at that and you put everything in perspective, I think there's a lot of nervous Alabama fans, especially with Ole Miss coming to town in a couple weeks. But that being said, I don't think Alabama's in bad shape.
Tony, I'll phrase it better. How about this? The last couple times Dan Mullen has faced Nick Saban, he's made it a closer game than people expected, and people thought Florida was going to get destroyed the way they looked weeks prior. But what about from a Nick Saban perspective? He relishes these type of teachable moments that come away with a W. Am I right?
I think so. I think this is I think he likes surviving these kind of games, I think because it builds teams together. It allows them to get through a tough game. Who knows if they're going to have a tough game against Ole Miss, against Georgia, against somebody in the playoff if they get there. If they have these tough environments, they can now lean back on, okay, well, we went down to the Swamp and we were able to get things done in that situation. We know what we're doing. And it's still a young team. It's at least in terms of experience. And so for those guys to be in a situation like this, I think it is a learning moment. And I think it is something that Nick Saban can kind of draw from later on in the season.
Tony, how's that offensive line coming along?
It's still a work in progress. And, I think you would want it to be a little bit better after 3 weeks. It's not there yet. I mean, you look at what Bryce Young has done. He is the #1 quarterback in the nation when under pressure. And that's a great stat, but it's not necessarily the stat that Alabama wants. I mean, they would like him to have time to throw the ball. I don't think, as good as he is at scrambling for his life and, throwing under pressure, it's not what you want from your quarterback. You want him to be in a comfortable situation. And, he hasn't really been. I think he's thrown 39 passes under pressure, which is, more than twice of what, Tua or Mac threw in their first 3 starts. So it's something that needs to be fixed. And then on the running game as well, they had their lowest running total since the 2019 game against South Carolina, against Florida. So they need to do better, and they need to kind of gel together. Alabama's got a lot of talent there too. If people can't come together, it might be time to put somebody else in and maybe switch things up a bit.
You alluded to it a minute ago, but I know you wrote a column recently on how Bryce's starts compare to Mac Jones starts out there. So after 3 starts, what are some things that are popping out that are alarming?
The pressures are crazy. I think I said he's been pressured like 44 times. Maybe he hasn't thrown the ball every time, but 44 dropbacks he's been pressured. I think Tua and Mac both had like 16 through 3 starts. So that's been something that, he does really well under pressure, though. He's been able to put up the numbers despite that. The thing that people point out to as well is the deep balls have just been totally, lacking in this offense. I think Bryce is 2 for 13. Granted, the 2 went for touchdowns, the 26-yarder to Billingsley and then the 94-yarder to Jamison Williams against Miami. But the deep ball hasn't been there. It's been, Bryce has had some drops, but he's also had some missed thrown balls. There's been, some they haven't counted against them in incompletions, but there's been some pass interferences that, that might have been a completed pass, if not for a pass interference. But that's something that needs to be, helped. It's kind of weird to, I'm glad I did that. It was a nice exercise, and it was really interesting to see where they're all, at this plateau in their careers. But everyone had a different 3 games. I mean, Mac Jones took over an offense that was already clicking. I mean, he filled in for Tua, so he had, an offense that was ready to go. And then Tua had 3 pretty easy games against Louisville, Arkansas State, and I think Ole Miss. So, I mean, he didn't really have much of a challenge of the defense. I think Bryce has gone against the 3 best defenses. And in both of Mac and Tua, they both had 4 first-rounders still on the roster in their first 3 starts at wide receiver. So they had a little bit more tools than what Bryce is doing. I think Bryce is doing more with less. And the numbers are still there. I mean, look, if Bryce Young continues on this path, he's going to have 40 touchdowns by the end of the regular season. And for a first-year starter, that's just absolutely incredible. There's still some room to grow, though. And I think the biggest thing you circle in that aspect is the deep balls. That's got to get better there.
All right, I got to ask you, I hate to jump ahead. I know Coach Saban would make me run laps for this, but are people talking about Ole Miss right now, even with Southern Miss? That's the big game that I know a lot of people in the SEC are circling.
Oh, yeah, you're not circling a 1-2 Southern Miss? No, I think, you're right on the money there. Ole Miss is the big topic around town. And to be honest with you, the Rebels are looking like they could be a contender for the West. They've got a great offense. I've been high on Matt can't say his name, Matt Corral, for a while now. And I think he's, a Heisman contender. And Lane Kiffin, you talk about coaches that, maybe have Nick Saban's number. Lane Kiffin is definitely one of those guys. I mean, that was an ugly game at Ole Miss last season. He's got another great offense. You can bet that he's going to come into Tuscaloosa wanting to make an impact and wanting to end that streak that Nick Saban has over assistants. And I wouldn't be surprised if, as great as Ole Miss has looked, I wouldn't be surprised if they have something up their sleeves for Alabama, just because of, I would venture to imagine that, Lane Kiffin has planned up something for this, matchup against Nick Saban. So it'll be interesting to see that one. I think, Alabama will probably be able to score a little bit more in Ole Miss than they were against Florida, but that defense is still going to have to get shaped up, or, it could be a track meet. I don't really think Alabama wants that against Ole Miss.
That is Tony TSOUKALAS, BamaInsider.com. Thank you so much, Tony. We'll catch up with you here next week, getting ready for that Ole Miss game.
Yeah, certainly.
All right, guys, we're going to close out now with Notre Dame and Wisconsin. Yes, Notre Dame is undefeated, but they have not gotten any style points on their way to that 3-0 record. We're joined by Matt Freeman of Irish Sports Daily to break it all down. How you doing, Matt?
I'm good. Appreciate you having me on here.
Yeah, man, let's talk a little bit. At what point do we know Notre Dame, right? It's been 3 games, and everybody keeps thinking, and we're dealing with it here in College Station with A&M. At what point do you feel like, all right, this is Notre Dame? Have we seen Notre Dame, or is the best still ahead?
Very good question. I think the best is potentially still ahead. I do think it's a somewhat similar situation with you guys and Clemson. I think Notre Dame struggled on the offensive line thus far. They're on their 3rd left tackle in as many games, so that's obviously not a good recipe for success. But the next 2 games, as you mentioned, Wisconsin on Saturday, and then Cincinnati comes to South Bend the week after. So I think that's going to be the test for Notre Dame, just in terms of if they can stack up against some of the, I guess, quality teams in the country this year, but also set the bar for themselves.
So what was different last week against Purdue, at least from a turnovers perspective? How were they able to cut that number down? Because I know that plagued them, obviously, in the first week of the season.
Yeah, it was a very ugly offensive game despite the lack of turnovers for Notre Dame. They just can't run the ball, but this week they just didn't fumble it. So that was kind of the difference there. But I do think on the flip side, the defense forced 3 turnovers. So I think that's kind of that helped just because they didn't do that against Toledo in week 2.
All right, so you mentioned Notre Dame having a hard time running the ball. I don't know if you know this. Wisconsin is not very good they're very good at stopping the run. So here we are. What's going to happen with Wisconsin, who is good at stopping the run, Notre Dame not good at running the ball? What's going to happen?
No, the wild joke is, it's probably going to be an ugly game like that Clemson-Georgia game, or the Wisconsin-Penn State game, or even the A&M Colorado game, where it's just going to be a 10-3 game, 10-6 game. So not expecting a lot of points, but at the same time, if Notre Dame can't stop the run, then it might turn into a shootout per se, just because Notre Dame will have to air it out. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how the game unfolds, but I have a feeling it'll be a low-scoring game.
So Wisconsin's coming off a bye week. Do you think that affects it at all, giving them an extra chance to just really focus, zero in on what the Irish do?
I think it always helps. I think early in the season, it might not mean as much just because you're still fresher, but an extra week to game plan for Notre Dame or any other team is still going to be an advantage. And I believe 6 of Notre Dame's opponents, maybe 7, have a bye week before they play them. So Notre Dame's kind of used to that, but at the same time, I do think it's a significant advantage at certain points.
Matt, one last thing for you. Give me the keys to victory for Notre Dame. What do they have to do against Wisconsin to come away with a W?
I think they have to run the football. They got to find a way to run it. They used an extra offensive lineman as a tight end last week to kind of boost it. Didn't work out great, but it was an improvement. But they just got to find a way to control the clock a little bit because obviously Wisconsin's going to try that. But as long as they can run the ball enough, I think they can find enough shot plays to kind of squeak out the victory. But on the flip side, they have to stop the run. If they don't stop the run, it's going to be a long day. Matt
Freeman, Irish Sports Daily. We appreciate it, my friend. We'll talk to you soon.
Yep, appreciate it, man.
I appreciate that. And that does it for Up to the Second College Football Season 4, Episode 4. I am David Nuño. I'll figure out the script at some point. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch up with you guys next week.